"You're nothing, Rolly," Reece sneered, the divorce papers landing like a slap on the table. "No one cares about you." The words echoed in the quiet room, but Rolly didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Instead, she picked up the papers, a faint smile curving on her lips. What Reece didn't know was that the empire he'd been so proud of was already slipping through his fingers, and in just 3 days, it would be gone because Rolly was no longer the girl he mocked. She was the one who had quietly stolen everything he thought was his. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you. Thank you for standing with me through the technical issues. We're finally steady again, and your support is the reason this channel keeps going. Before we begin, I want to speak a quick blessing over everyone watching. To the women, may God strengthen your spirit and calm every storm in your heart. To the men, may God guide your steps and multiply your efforts, and may his protection stay over every one of you. Amen. I'm also celebrating my very first subscribers, thank you. Your support means more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your subscription, your likes, and your shares to friends and family keep this channel alive and growing. It truly makes a difference. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from so I know you're here with me. Now let's get into today's story. As Rolly looked down at the divorce papers in her hand, a wave of calm determination washed over her. She had been waiting for this moment, not the humiliation, not the public insult, but the moment when the world would finally see who she truly was. Over the last 8 months, she had quietly built her empire one share at a time. And now, she was about to take back what was rightfully hers. Reece had no idea who he was really dealing with. She let the papers fall onto the table, her fingers still clutching them, as if they held the last remnants of her old life. But deep down, Rolly knew it wasn't about this anymore. It wasn't about the failed relationship or the cruel words he'd thrown at her like darts. It was about something much bigger. The people in this room, Reece, his father, his family, had always underestimated her. The quiet girl from the wrong side of the tracks. The one who couldn't possibly understand their world, their business. She'd been invisible, and they had treated her like nothing. But now, Rolly was the one who held all the cards. She'd been methodical, cautious. For months, she'd worked in silence, hiding her true intentions behind the mask of a broken woman, a woman who had been discarded, thrown aside like an unwanted possession. But they were wrong. They didn't know she was playing a game they couldn't even comprehend. For the past 8 months, while Reece paraded around, convinced that the world was his, Rolly had been quietly acquiring shares in Reece John Foods, the empire his family had built. It started small, just a few shares here and there, but as she gained momentum, her movements became more calculated. She wasn't buying through her name, of course. That would have raised too many suspicions. Instead, she created shell companies, dozens of them, each with a different name, a different identity. Anonymous investment groups that had no ties to her. She used brokers who had no idea who she was, meeting with them in backroom offices and dimly lit conference rooms, always careful, always watching her every move. Rolly didn't make a single misstep. Every trade was planned, every purchase precise. Each share she acquired was one step closer to her ultimate goal, total control over Reece's empire. What Reece didn't know was that while he was busy with his lavish dinners and his growing list of miscalculations, she had already bought more than 60% of Reece John Foods. She owned it now. The thought of it sent a shiver down her spine. She had become something they could never have imagined, a force, an invisible power that controlled the very company they thought was theirs. In just a few days, Reece would learn that nothing he thought was certain, nothing he held dear, was truly under his command. Rolly couldn't help but think back to her childhood. Growing up in Chicago, life had never been easy. It was a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, and where the rich and powerful walked past her without a second glance. She remembered the stares from kids at school, the way they whispered when she walked by. They'd seen her as different, less than them. It wasn't just the kids, though. It was the way the world saw her. The way Reece had once seen her, a girl from a poor neighborhood with no connections, no power, no chance. He had taken her in because it was convenient, because it made him feel good to have someone by his side who wasn't a threat. But he never truly saw her, never truly understood what she was capable of. He'd called her fat tonight. Useless. But what did that even mean? He had no idea how many years it had taken for Rolly to build herself up, to learn to trust her instincts, to turn her quiet rage into something that would shake the foundations of his world. It wasn't just about the money, though. The money would be nice, of course. It wasn't about showing him how wrong he had been about her. It was about proving to herself that she was more than what they all thought she was. More than just a discarded girlfriend. More than just the quiet girl from the wrong side of town. She had learned to be patient, to wait. The plan had been in motion for months. Every move, every acquisition had been calculated, precise. And now, as she looked at the divorce papers lying in front of her, Rolly knew that the moment she had worked for was finally at hand. The phone buzzed on the table, snapping her back into the present. It was a text from her lawyer. Alex Green, asterisk, everything is set. We're ready for the board meeting. The documents are prepared. It's time. Rolly read the message twice, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. This was it. The moment she would walk into that boardroom, and the world would see who she truly was. Not the quiet, meek girl who had been left behind, but the silent billionaire who had just stolen everything Reece thought he owned. She stood up, her heart steady, her mind clear. The next step was simple. Get Reece's attention. Show him that he was playing a game he couldn't win. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Then she typed, "I'll be there in 3 days." The moment was finally here. Rolly looked out of the window at the bustling streets of Chicago below. The city was alive. But she was no longer just a passenger. She had taken control of her own destiny, and now Reece would see just how far she had come. As the wind swept through her hair, she allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile. This wasn't just revenge. It was redemption. It was power. And in 3 days, it would be hers. Tanya was everything Reece thought he wanted. Young, beautiful, and a constant reminder of the life he thought he deserved. But Rolly knew the truth. Tanya wasn't just another pretty face, she was a predator, and she had Reece wrapped around her finger. Rolly had first seen her at one of Reece's private parties. Tanya had slid into the room like she belonged there, a perfect blend of sweet smiles and flirtatious laughter. She was everything Rolly was not, carefree, young, and seemingly without a care in the world. To Reece, Tanya was an escape. She didn't demand his time like Rolly did. She didn't challenge him. Tanya was an answer to a problem, and Reece didn't seem to care that his solution came with an ulterior motive. At first, Rolly didn't think much of her. Just another one of Reece's distractions, she assumed. But it didn't take long for Rolly to see the cracks in their relationship. Tanya wasn't just a mistress. She was playing a game one Rolly wasn't willing to lose. The first lie came casually, like it was nothing. Tanya had said it in passing, her voice sweet and innocent as she claimed that Reece was the father of her child. Reece, as always, didn't question it. He'd always been too self-absorbed to question much of anything. At first, it seemed harmless. Tanya's pregnancy should have been a small blip in their already fractured relationship. But as the weeks went on, Tanya's manipulations grew more obvious. She used her so-called pregnancy as leverage, pushing Reece to pull away from Rolly. "Rolly's too fat, too lazy," she told him one night. Over dinner, her voice sugary sweet. "She's not keeping up with you. You deserve more." Reece, that's when the lies hit hard. Tanya wasn't just tearing Rolly down. She was pushing Reece further away with each new claim, making him feel justified in leaving Rolly for her. But Rolly didn't sit idly by. She watched. She listened. She observed. She had to. Rolly quietly used her connections, hired investigators, and began digging into Tanya's story. Everything Tanya had claimed, the late-night cravings, the trips to the doctor, the private ultrasound, was a lie. A fabricated, carefully constructed web of deceit designed to drive a wedge between Rolly and Reece. It didn't take long before Rolly uncovered the truth. The texts, the photos, The bank record showing Tanya's private doctor visits, all fabricated. There were no medical bills for a pregnancy, no evidence of doctor appointments. Rolly had the evidence right in front of her, proof that Tanya had lied about everything. Reece was being played, and he had no idea. Rolly's anger simmered beneath the surface, barely contained. Every lie Tanya had told, every piece of false evidence she had fabricated, only fueled Rolly's desire for revenge. Tanya had known what she was doing, and now it was time for Rolly to make sure Reece knew who he was really dealing with. As Rolly stared at the files she had compiled, text messages, doctored photos, and even the fake medical records, she felt something shift inside her. The anger was no longer just an emotional response. It was a weapon. Rolly had been silent, observant, and patient up until now, but Tanya had crossed a line. She had manipulated the one person Rolly had ever loved, and that couldn't go unanswered. Rolly was done sitting in the shadows. She had been biding her time, but now she was going to take control. The next step was clear. Expose Tanya's lies, and take the one thing Reece cared about most. Rolly knew it was time to strike. One move, and the empire Reece thought was his would belong to her. And this time, Tanya wouldn't be the one getting away with anything. Rolly was playing the game now, and there was no going back. Rolly sat in front of her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dimly lit room. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, clicking through pages of documents, transferring shares from one account to the next. Each click was a step closer to her goal. Reece's empire, once untouchable, was now just a collection of numbers in her hands. She had spent the last 8 months working in silence, building a fortress with paper and ink, and now she was about to watch it collapse. She had used multiple fake identities, names no one would ever suspect, shell companies, off-the-record deals, anonymous investment groups. It was all by design, a carefully orchestrated plan to stay under the radar. Reece and his family thought she was nothing more than a discarded ex-girlfriend, someone to be mocked and forgotten. But what they didn't realize was that she had been quietly acquiring shares in Reece John Foods, the very company that had once made him feel invincible. Each share she bought pushed her closer to the point of control. She used legal loopholes, moving assets between companies, hiding behind layers of bureaucracy that no one would think to question. No one knew Rolly's true identity behind the mask of these fake entities. She had kept herself invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their world. The quiet girl from the wrong side of town was now the one pulling the strings. Yet, as she watched the numbers climb, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if it was worth it. Was this really what she wanted? All these months of carefully calculated moves, building her empire while Reece and his family were none the wiser. There was a rush, sure control, power, the knowledge that she had outsmarted them all. But it came at a cost. She thought back to the nights when Reece had belittled her, calling her lazy, telling her she wasn't good enough. He had told her that she would never be part of his world, that she was nothing without him. The words stung then, but now they were just fuel for her fire. Her eyes flickered over the papers, the evidence of all her hard work, documents, bank statements, shares. It wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the power. She had taken something from them, something that no one could ever take back. She had stolen control right out from under their noses. But even as she stared at the empire she had built, Rolly couldn't shake the sense of loss that lingered in her chest. It wasn't the empire she wanted, it was justice. Reece's betrayal, Tanya's manipulation, they had pushed her to this point, and now she was ready to make her move. But something still gnawed at her. How much of herself had she sacrificed to get here? How much of her heart had been buried beneath the strategy, the calculations, the cold, controlled movements? The weight of it all pressed down on her as she closed the laptop and stood up. She walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Chicago, her city, the same streets that had taught her to survive, to never show her cards. It had made her who she was today, the woman who could bring down empires and walk away unscathed. Now she was ready. The plan was set in motion, and Reece and Tanya would soon see just how far she had come. Rolly wasn't just the ex-girlfriend anymore. She was the silent partner, the woman who had outsmarted them all. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from her lawyer. "Everything is ready. The documents, the evidence, it's all in place. The board meeting is set." Rowley smiled faintly. The game was on. Reece swaggered into the office that morning, his usual confident grin plastered on his face. He had no idea what was coming. To him, everything was still under control. He slid into his leather chair like it was his throne, ignoring the subtle unease among the staff as they watched him settle in. The room buzzed with the usual morning chaos, but to Reece, it was just business as usual. He tossed a few papers aside, not bothering to read them, before dialing Tanya's number. He needed her to come by later. They'd been spending more time together, and he was starting to enjoy the sense of freedom she brought, freedom from the weight of his responsibilities. He was done with Rowley, or so he told himself. The moment he signed the divorce papers, he thought he was rid of her. "Broken woman," Reece muttered under his breath. "She'll get over it. She's nothing without me." As he leaned back in his chair, his mind drifted to Tanya. She had been a distraction, yes, but she was more than that. She was the validation he needed. Tanya never asked questions, never demanded more than he was willing to give. Unlike Rowley, who had always expected more from him, who had always tried to push him to be better. He didn't want to be better, he just wanted to be free. Unbeknownst to him, Rowley was quietly working from the shadows, making her own plans, preparing her final move. She had been waiting for this moment. The moment when Reece thought everything was under his control. He had never suspected her of being anything more than a discarded ex, someone beneath him. But he was wrong. Rowley, on the other hand, was ready. She had already set the stage. The invitations were sent. The board members were on their way. A routine board meeting, she had called it. Just another quarterly update. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except everything was about to change. Rowley sat at her desk, reviewing the documents she'd meticulously put together. The evidence of Reece's financial mismanagement, the proof of Tanya's lies, and, most importantly, the final paperwork that solidified her control over Reece John Foods. In just a few hours, she would walk into that boardroom and reveal herself not as the broken woman Reece thought she was, but as the one who held the power. Meanwhile, Reece was oblivious. He was still too wrapped up in his own arrogance to notice the signs, the odd stock movements, the subtle shifts in the company's finances. Small enough to ignore, big enough to cause trouble, but Reece, too self-assured, dismissed them as nothing. His mind was already elsewhere, thinking about how he could spin this latest chapter of his life with Tanya and make sure it didn't come back to haunt him. Rowley, however, had seen it all. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she was about to turn everything on its head. As Rowley prepared for the final confrontation, she couldn't help but reflect on the years of being dismissed, ignored, and humiliated. Reece had made her feel small, like she was nothing. He thought she'd always be the quiet, meek ex-girlfriend he could discard when it suited him. But this wasn't just about business, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't good enough, you know the quiet power of revenge. Rowley's story isn't just about taking over a company, it's about standing up, reclaiming your voice, and taking control. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to see how it all unfolds. The boardroom was filled with the usual suspects, Reece and his family, a few key executives, and Tanya, who sat with a smug smile as if she already owned the place. The tension in the air was thick, but none of them suspected what was coming. They thought it was just another routine meeting, another quarterly update to review numbers and discuss future projections. But none of them knew that this was the moment everything would change. Rowley walked in, every step measured, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She was dressed for war, sharp black pantsuit, white blouse, hair pulled back in a clean, tight bun. She moved with purpose, exuding a quiet but undeniable power. The room fell into an uneasy silence as everyone turned to look at her. Reece's face twisted into a smile, but it was tight, forced. "Ah, Rowley, just in time," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Are you here to beg for a settlement?" Tanya chuckled, looking Rolly up and down as if she was already victorious. But Rolly didn't respond to the taunts. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the front of the room, stood tall, and placed a stack of documents on the table. The room went still as she slid them across, her calm voice cutting through the silence. "I'm not here to beg," she said, meeting Reece's eyes. "I'm here to show you how I own everything you think you control." Reece froze, his smile faltering as he scanned the papers. Tanya raised an eyebrow, glancing at Reece, confused. The executives around the table whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. With deliberate ease, Rolly pulled out a series of documents, financial records, stock transfers, and official filings. "You see, Reece," she continued, her tone level, "while you were distracted by your little affair with Tanya, I was quietly buying shares. Over the last few months, I've acquired 67% of Reece John Foods." The shock was immediate. Gasps echoed in the room. Reece's face drained of color as his world suddenly began to unravel before his eyes. Tanya's smugness faltered, her expression shifting to one of disbelief. Rolly wasn't done. She wasn't just going to take over the company. She was going to expose every lie Reece had hidden. She turned to Tanya, her eyes cold. "And while you were busy playing the role of the helpless mistress, pretending to be pregnant to get Reece's attention, I've gathered all the proof of your deceit." Rolly pulled out more documents, photos, medical records, and text messages. Tanya's pregnancy was a lie. All of it. She manipulated you, Reece, and now here's the proof. She placed the evidence in front of the stunned board members, who now stared in horror as the truth began to sink in. The room was silent. No one spoke. Reece sat frozen, his mind racing, trying to process what was happening. His empire, the one he thought he controlled, was slipping away. Rolly's voice broke the silence. "You've been lying to everyone. You've let Tanya manipulate you, while I've been quietly taking over everything you thought you had." Reece opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't form a response. His empire, his reputation, everything he had worked for, was collapsing in front of him. Rolly looked down at him with quiet contempt, her lips curling into a small, victorious smile. "This is mine now," she said, her voice calm and unwavering. With those words, the boardroom shifted. Reece's empire, built on arrogance and deceit, was no longer his, and Rolly, the quiet, underestimated ex-girlfriend, had taken everything. Reece's phone rang incessantly, the sound cutting through the heavy silence that filled his office. Each ring echoed like a nail in the coffin of his crumbling empire. He sat hunched at his desk, his fingers gripping the edge as he stared at the board meeting minutes in front of him. Everything was unraveling: his wealth, his power, his reputation, everything slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp. "This can't be happening," he muttered to himself, desperately dialing his lawyer's number. The call connected after a few rings. "Alex, I need you here now. We need to fight this. I can't lose control. I won't let her do this to me." On the other end of the line, his lawyer's voice was calm but strained. "Reece, we have to consider our options. She's legally in control now, 67% of the company. It's going to be hard to challenge that." Reece slammed his fist on the desk, frustration building. Asterisk, no, I can't, asterisk. He paused, his breath ragged. "She's playing dirty. I know she's been manipulating things behind my back. We need to fight her. I'll use the board. I'll convince them I'm still the best choice to lead the company. We need to push back." But even as Reece spoke, his words felt hollow. The reality was setting in. The board, the employees, everyone who had once followed him, now saw Rolly for what she truly was, the one who had outsmarted him, the one who held all the power. Meanwhile, across town, Rolly was taking steady, deliberate steps to solidify her control. She had already begun restructuring the company, cutting the dead weight Reece's allies, the ones who had blindly followed him, all the people who had enabled his arrogance. She made it clear, no more ties to the old regime. She sent out memos to the remaining executives. They were informed that any decisions from now on would come from her. Reece? He was out, and Tanya, who had so confidently played her part, was quietly dismissed, her position nullified. Rolly didn't waste time with sentiment. She was focused on the future, on making sure the company was secure in her hands. Rolly was no longer the broken woman Reece had thought she was. She was now the CEO of Reece John Foods, steering it into a new era. She set the course for the future, reshaping the company's image and forging new alliances. Her vision for the company was clear, and nothing was going to stop her from taking it to new heights. But the fallout from Reece's mismanagement was only just beginning. The ripple effect was felt almost immediately. Key employees who had once been loyal to him started to leave. Trust in Reece's leadership crumbled. He had made reckless decisions, and now those decisions were coming back to haunt him. Rumors began to spread, not just within the company but throughout the business world. Investors started to question Reece's ability to lead. His reputation, once polished and untouchable, was now tarnished beyond repair. He had been arrogant, dismissive of those around him, and the consequences were devastating. If you've ever seen someone rise from the ashes, if you've ever had to rebuild everything after being crushed, you know the pain and the power in Rolly's story. Rolly took everything that was taken from her and rebuilt it into something even stronger. This journey isn't just about power, it's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours. Subscribe to see what happens next. It's a journey you won't forget. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension. Reece stood at the head of the table, his face drawn with desperation, trying to regain some semblance of control. His attempt was futile, a last-ditch effort to claw back what was already lost. But Rolly, calm and composed, was no longer the woman he had belittled. She was his superior now, undisputed, unyielding, and in full control of everything he thought he owned. "Rolly," Reece said, his voice sharp, pleading, "this isn't over. You can't just walk in here and take everything. I built this company. This is my legacy." His words were desperate, but his eyes betrayed him. They were clouded with fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of the woman who'd become his worst nightmare. Rolly's eyes didn't waver as she met his gaze. She had heard this before, the hollow claims of ownership, the arrogance. But it didn't matter anymore. His empire had crumbled, and she was the one who would rebuild it on her terms. "You built it?" she asked coolly, her voice echoing through the room. "You ran it into the ground with your greed and your arrogance. And now, it's mine." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, without hesitation, she slid the final, irreversible documents toward him. His name, his signature, his empire now, irrevocably, under her command. Reece's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't just—" "I already have." Rolly cut him off. "I own 67% of the company, Reece. And this," she motioned to the documents, "is just the final step. You've made too many mistakes, trusted the wrong people, and now you're out." He stumbled backward, his mind racing, trying to process what was happening. But it was too late. Every decision he had made, every misstep, every act of arrogance had led him to this moment, and there was no escaping the consequences. But Rolly wasn't done. She turned to Tanya, who had been silent, watching from the corner with a smug smile. Tanya's role in this betrayal hadn't gone unnoticed. Rolly had already gathered the evidence, and now it was time to expose her for what she was. A manipulator. "Tanya," Rolly began, her voice icy, "you thought you could use your lies to manipulate Reece. You thought you could play me. But I see through you." She slid a folder onto the table in front of Tanya, photos, text messages, medical records, the proof of her deception. Tanya's fake pregnancy, her calculated attempts to tear Reece and Rolly apart. Tanya's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Rolly didn't give her the chance to spin another lie. "You're done," Rolly said, her voice final. "You're out of the company, and you're out of my life." Tanya opened her mouth to protest, but the words never came. She stood, shaking, and left the room, her eyes filled with fury and defeat. Reece watched her go, his mind still reeling. His entire world was collapsing, and he was powerless to stop it. His reputation was in ruins, his empire destroyed. He had nothing left. No power, no control. Rolly, however, stood tall, unwavering, and as the room grew quiet, she knew she had won. She had come from nothing, fought her way to the top, and now she was in control. As Reece sat there, defeated, watching her take the reins, Rolly couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had led her here. The humiliation, the betrayal, the years of being underestimated, but this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Rolly sat in Reece's chair, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had taken everything from him, but now it was hers to build. She had come so far, but she knew the real work was just beginning. The world was watching, and she was ready to prove that the power she now held was just the start of something much bigger. Rolly stood in the expansive, glass-walled office, looking out over the city below. The morning sun reflected off the buildings, casting a golden light that seemed to mirror the new path she was walking. The weight of everything she had accomplished settled on her shoulders. This was no longer just about taking control of a company. This was about taking back her life, her dignity, and her future. She was no longer the quiet girl from the streets, the one who had been belittled and ignored. She was a powerful, self-assured leader, someone who commanded respect. The phone on her desk rang, but she didn't flinch. She picked it up calmly, her voice steady as she began the call. This was her world now, and every decision she made would shape its future. There were no more second-guessing, no more waiting in the wings. She had arrived, and it felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Miss Carter," her assistant's voice came through the line. "The board is ready for your meeting at 10. They're eager to hear your vision for the company." Rolly smiled faintly. Asterisk, her time's vision. The company wasn't just Reece John Foods anymore. It was hers, built on her terms, shaped by her decisions. The future of the company was bright, and she had every intention of leading it into that future. No more playing second fiddle, no more being dismissed as the ex-girlfriend. As she walked into the boardroom, every eye turned to her. Reece's former allies, those who had once backed him, were now sitting quietly, waiting for her to speak. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the realization that they had no choice but to follow her lead now. Rolly had worked hard for this moment, and she was taking it. Reece, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished from the company, his reputation in tatters. No longer the proud CEO, no longer the man who had seemed untouchable. Reece was a shadow of his former self. He had nothing left. His arrogance had cost him everything, and now he was left watching from the sidelines, powerless to undo the damage he had done. Rolly thought of him briefly, but only for a moment. She had no sympathy for him now. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. She had moved on. He would be a distant memory, one that faded as quickly as the echo of his insults. She turned her attention back to the room full of executives, her voice cutting through the silence. "The company is in a new era now. I'll be implementing new strategies, new leadership, and we're going to grow. We're going to innovate." As she spoke, Rolly felt the weight of her journey, the years of humiliation, the battles she fought in silence, the careful planning that had led to this moment. And then, in a quiet moment of reflection, she realized something. This victory had never been about revenge. It was about reclaiming her own power, her confidence, her place in the world. Reece had underestimated her. Everyone had. But now, they would see exactly what she was capable of. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever fought back when no one believed in you, Rolly's story is a testament to the power of resilience. She didn't just take back what was hers, she built something bigger than herself. Subscribe for more stories of empowerment, and remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story.